Sometimes the worst moments in our
Listen
lives
closely,
become the
son.
doorway
This
to
is
our
important.
greatest transformations. What happens when a single act of cruelty meets an unexpected response of grace? This is the story of Marcus Thompson, a young man whose anger and prejudice led him to commit an unthinkable act against a war veteran in a wheelchair. But what followed wasn't what anyone expected, least of all Marcus himself. In a world where we're quick to judge and slow to forgive, this true story reminds us that redemption can come from the most unlikely places. It's about how one elderly veteran's response to hatred changed not just one life, but an entire community. And it proves that sometimes the people we hurt the most become the very ones who save us. This is a story about falling to your lowest point and discovering that rock bottom can become the foundation for something beautiful. It's about learning that every person carries both the capacity for cruelty and the potential for extraordinary kindness. Most importantly, it's about understanding that no one is beyond redemption, not even when they've done something that seems unforgivable. Marcus Thompson had always been angry. At 19, he carried the weight of disappointment like a heavy coat he couldn't take off. Growing up in the rougher part of Riverside City, he had learned early that the world didn't owe him anything. His father had left when Marcus was 12, his mother worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table, and his dreams of playing college football had crashed along with his knee during senior year. The injury had happened during the championship game. One tackle, one wrong twist, and suddenly his full scholarship to State University was gone. The doctor said he'd walk fine, but his running days were over. That was 2 years ago, and the bitterness had only grown stronger with time. While his former teammates were living it up on campus, Marcus was stuck working at an auto parts store during the day and bouncing at a local club on weekends. His anger had found many targets over the months. He was angry at his father for abandoning the family. He was angry at the coach who couldn't get him a medical scholarship. He was angry at his friends who seemed to move on with their lives while he felt stuck in quicksand. But lately, his anger had taken a darker turn, focusing on anyone he perceived as getting handouts or special treatment. That Tuesday afternoon in October started like any other. Marcus had finished a shift at Murphy's Auto Parts and was walking through downtown Riverside to catch the bus home. The autumn air was crisp, and the leaves were changing colors, but Marcus barely noticed. He was too busy replaying another argument with his supervisor about getting promoted to assistant manager. The position had gone to someone else again, someone with a college degree that Marcus would never have. As he turned the corner onto Main Street, he saw the small crowd gathered outside Riverside Community Center. There were tables set up with banners and pamphlets, and several older men in military uniforms were talking to passersby. Marcus recognized it immediately as another one of those veteran fundraising events that seem to happen every few months. His jaw tightened as he watched people dropping money into donation buckets and shaking hands with the veterans. In Marcus's mind, these were just more people getting sympathy and handouts for something that happened decades ago. He thought about his own struggles, how nobody was organizing fundraisers for kids who lost their scholarships or families struggling to pay rent. The crowd was thick enough that Marcus had to slow down as he approached. He could hear fragments of conversation about upcoming veteran housing projects and job training programs. His irritation grew with each step. These old men got benefits, health care, and constant community support, while people like his mother worked themselves to exhaustion just to survive. As he tried to push through the crowd, Marcus found himself directly behind a wheelchair. The chair was occupied by an elderly man with silver hair and deep lines etched into his face. The man wore a navy blue jacket with various patches and pins, and across the back of his wheelchair hung a small American flag. He was speaking quietly to a young woman who was writing something on a clipboard. Marcus could have easily stepped around the wheelchair, but something dark inside him snapped. All his frustration, all his anger, all his sense of unfairness crystallized into this single moment. Without thinking, without considering the consequences, Marcus drew back his right foot and kicked the wheelchair as hard as he could. The impact sent the chair lurching forward violently. The elderly veteran, completely unprepared for the sudden movement, was thrown from his seat and hit the concrete sidewalk hard. Gasps and screams erupted from the crowd as people rushed toward the fallen man. The clipboard clattered to the ground, and the small American flag was torn from the wheelchair in the chaos. For a moment, time seemed frozen. Marcus stood there, his heart pounding, suddenly aware of what he had done. The elderly man lay motionless on the sidewalk, and Marcus could see blood beginning to pool beneath his head. The crowd was in shock, with several people kneeling beside the veteran, while others were already pulling out their phones to call for help. "Did you see what that kid just did?" someone shouted. "Call 911. He's unconscious." "That's Harold Steinberg. He fought in Vietnam." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Harold Steinberg wasn't just any veteran. He was practically a local legend in Riverside. Everyone knew his story. He had served 2 tours in Vietnam, been wounded in combat, and had spent the last 30 years volunteering with various community organizations. He helped run the food bank, mentored troubled youth, and organized charity drives for homeless families. Marcus felt the first wave of real panic wash over him as he realized the magnitude of what he had done. People in the crowd were starting to turn their attention toward him, their faces showing a mixture of horror and rage. Someone pointed in his direction and shouted, "That's the one who did it. Don't let him get away." The smart thing would have been to run immediately, but Marcus felt paralyzed by the scene in front of him. Harold Steinberg still hadn't moved, and more blood was spreading on the concrete. A woman who appeared to be a nurse was checking his pulse and trying to keep his head stable. The wail of approaching sirens could be heard in the distance. "You piece of garbage!" a man in his 40s shouted as he stepped toward Marcus. "What is wrong with you?" That broke Marcus out of his trance. He turned and ran, pushing through the crowd and sprinting down a side street as fast as his damaged knee would allow. Behind him, he could hear angry voices and the sound of footsteps following. His knee was already starting to ache, but adrenaline kept him moving. He ducked into an alley 3 blocks away and pressed himself against the dumpster, trying to catch his breath and process what had just happened. His hands were shaking uncontrollably, and he felt like he might throw up. The image of Harold Steinberg lying motionless on the sidewalk kept replaying in his mind, along with the sound of his head hitting the concrete. Marcus pulled out his phone and searched for news about the incident, but it was too soon for anything to show up online. He tried calling his mother, but she was at work and couldn't talk. He had never felt more alone or more terrified in his life. What if Harold Steinberg died? What if someone had recorded the whole thing on their phone? What if the police were already looking for him? As the immediate panic began to fade, a different kind of fear set in. This wasn't just about getting arrested or going to jail, though those possibilities terrified him. For the first time since his injury, Marcus was forced to confront who he had become. He thought about his mother, who had raised him to be better than this. He thought about his younger sister, who still looked up to him despite everything. What would they think when they found out what he had done? The sirens were getting closer, and Marcus knew he couldn't stay hidden in the alley forever. He needed to get home and figure out what to do next. But as he started to move, he realized that everything had already changed. There was no going back to the way things were an hour ago. He had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and whatever happened next, he would have to live with the consequences of those few seconds of rage. As Marcus made his way through the back streets toward his apartment, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken a turn that would change everything. He had no idea how right he was, or how the man he had just brutally attacked would soon become the most important person in his life. Sometimes the worst mistakes we make become the beginning of our salvation, but Marcus Thompson was still hours away from understanding that truth. Marcus barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Harold Steinberg's body hitting the pavement. He kept checking the local news websites on his phone, refreshing them obsessively, waiting for information about the veteran's condition. The silence was almost worse than bad news would have been. By morning, the story was everywhere. Local veteran brutally attacked during community event read the headline in the Riverside Daily. The article included a photo of Harold Steinberg from his younger days in military uniform, and another picture from the scene showing the overturned wheelchair and the blood on the sidewalk. Marcus felt sick reading the description of Harold's injuries: severe concussion, broken ribs, and a fractured wrist from trying to break his fall. The worst part was learning about who Harold really was. The article detailed his military service, his 2 Purple Hearts, and his decades of community work. He had helped establish 3 homeless shelters, mentored over 100 at-risk youth, and had personally paid for Christmas gifts for needy families every year for the past 15 years. The man Marcus had seen as just another person looking for handouts was actually someone who had spent his entire adult life giving back to others. Marcus's phone rang while he was reading the article. It was his supervisor at the auto parts store. "Marcus, you need to come in early today," Jim Murphy said without preamble. "Police were here this morning asking questions about you." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggest you did something really stupid yesterday. They left a card and said you should call them." Jim's voice was cold and professional. "Look, kid, I don't know what's going on, but I can't have this kind of heat around my business. Consider yourself on unpaid leave until this gets sorted out." The line went dead. Marcus stared at his phone, realizing that his problems were just beginning. He thought about running, maybe catching a bus to another state and starting over somewhere else. But where would he go? He had barely enough money to cover rent for another month, and his car had been repossessed 6 months ago. His mother, Rosa, came home from her night shift at the hospital around 8 in the morning. Marcus was sitting at their small kitchen table, still in the same clothes from yesterday, surrounded by empty coffee cups and crumpled tissues. She took one look at him and knew something was terribly wrong. "Mijo, what happened?" she asked, her voice filled with the kind of maternal concern that made Marcus want to break down completely. He tried to tell her, but the words got stuck in his throat. "How do you explain to your mother that you've become the kind of person who attacks elderly veterans in wheelchairs? How do you admit that all her sacrifices to raise you right had somehow failed?" Rosa sat down across from him and waited patiently while he struggled to speak. She had always been his anchor, working 3 jobs to keep the family afloat after his father left. She cleaned office buildings at night, worked at a daycare during the day, and took in sewing projects on weekends. Despite her exhaustion, she had never missed one of his football games or parent-teacher conferences. Finally, Marcus managed to tell her what he had done. He watched his mother's face change as the story unfolded, seeing disappointment and horror replace the concern in her eyes. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Dios mío, Marcus," she whispered finally, "what have you become?" Those words cut deeper than any punishment could have. His mother had always believed in him, even when he stopped believing in himself. She had told everyone in the neighborhood that her son was going to college, that he was going to make something of himself. Now she was looking at him like he was a stranger. The knock on their apartment door came 2 hours later. Marcus knew who it would be before his mother opened it. Detective Sarah Chun and Officer Martinez stood in the hallway, their expressions serious but not unkind. "Mrs. Thompson, we need to speak with your son Marcus about an incident that occurred yesterday afternoon." Rosa stepped aside to let them in, and Marcus stood up from the couch where he had been waiting. His hands were shaking again, but he tried to keep his voice steady. "I know why you're here," he said. Detective Chin nodded. "We have several witnesses who identified you as the person who assaulted Harold Steinberg yesterday. We also have security camera footage from the community center that clearly shows what happened." Marcus felt a strange sense of relief that the waiting was over. How is Mr. Steinberg?" "He's alive," Officer Martinez said. "He spent the night in the hospital with a concussion and broken ribs. He's stable, but the doctors say it could have been much worse if he had hit his head at a different angle." The relief was overwhelming, but it was quickly replaced by shame as Detective Chun continued. "Mr. Thompson, I need to inform you that you're under arrest for aggravated assault on an elderly person. You have the right to remain silent." As the detective read him his rights, Marcus looked at his mother. She was crying quietly, her hand pressed to her mouth. His sister Carmen, who was 17 and had been getting ready for school, stood in the doorway of their shared bedroom with tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," Marcus said to them, knowing how inadequate the words were. The next several hours passed in a blur of booking procedures, fingerprinting, and phone calls. Marcus was assigned a public defender, a tired-looking woman named Jennifer Walsh, who explained that he was facing serious charges that could result in several years in prison. "The district attorney is under pressure to prosecute this aggressively," she explained during their brief meeting. "Attacking a veteran, especially someone as respected as Harold Steinberg, has created a lot of public outrage. Your best bet is probably to plead guilty and hope for a lenient sentence." Marcus spent that night in county jail, sharing a cell with a man who had been arrested for drunk and disorderly conduct. The reality of prison life hit him immediately. This wasn't like the movies, it was just depressing and frightening. He lay awake on the thin mattress, listening to the sounds of other inmates, and thinking about how his life had spiraled so completely out of control. The next morning brought more bad news. The local news stations had picked up the story, and Marcus's name was being released to the public. Jennifer Walsh warned him that there would likely be protesters outside the courthouse when he appeared for his arraignment. The veteran community was particularly outraged, and several groups were calling for the maximum sentence. But the worst moment came when his mother visited him that afternoon. She looked exhausted and older than he had ever seen her. She told him that reporters had been to their apartment building, and that Carmen was being harassed at school by kids who had seen the news. "The landlord called this morning," Rosa said quietly. "He wants us out by the end of the month. He says having a criminal in the building is bad for his reputation." Marcus realized that his actions weren't just destroying his own life. They were destroying his family's life too. His mother would lose the apartment she had worked so hard to afford. Carmen might have to change schools, all because he had let his anger control him for 30 seconds. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he said through the plexiglass that separated them. Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then she leaned forward and placed her hand against the glass. "I still love you, Mijo, but I don't understand what happened to the boy I raised." That night, alone in his cell, Marcus finally allowed himself to really think about what kind of person he had become. He thought about all the small choices over the past 2 years that had led him to this point. Each moment of giving in to anger, each time he had blamed others for his problems, each day he had chosen bitterness over hope. He thought about Harold Steinberg, lying in a hospital bed because of him, a man who had served his country, been wounded in combat, and then spent decades helping others. A man who probably had never done anything to deserve what Marcus had done to him. For the first time since his injury, Marcus began to understand that his real problem wasn't his knee, or his lost scholarship, or his absent father. His problem was that he had allowed himself to become someone he didn't recognize. Someone who could hurt an innocent person without provocation. Someone who could destroy his family's life because he couldn't control his own emotions. As he lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the jail around him, Marcus began to realize that he had hit rock bottom. But he also began to understand that maybe, just maybe, rock bottom was exactly where he needed to be. Because it was only from the very bottom that he could start to build something better. He had no way of knowing that Harold Steinberg was lying awake in his own hospital bed that same night, thinking about the angry young man who had attacked him. He had no idea that the veteran was already planning something that would change both of their lives forever. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the people we hurt the most become the very ones who save us. Marcus Thompson was about to learn that truth in the most profound way possible. Marcus had been in county jail for 5 days when Jennifer Walsh, his public defender, called for an emergency meeting. She looked confused and somewhat bewildered as she sat down across from him in the small conference room. "Marcus, I need you to explain something to me," she began, shuffling through papers in her briefcase. "I just got off the phone with the district attorney's office, and they're telling me something that doesn't make any sense." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He had been expecting the worst news possible, maybe additional charges or evidence that would guarantee a long prison sentence. "What is it?" Harold Steinberg wants to meet with you, Jennifer said, looking at him carefully for his reaction. Not only that, but he's asking the DA to consider alternative sentencing options. He specifically mentioned restorative justice programs. Marcus stared at her in disbelief. I don't understand. Why would you want to help me? I put in the hospital. Jennifer shook her head. I've been doing this for 12 years, and I've never seen anything like it. Usually, victims want maximum punishment, especially in cases involving elderly assault. But Mr. Steinberg has been calling the prosecutor's office every day since he got out of the hospital, asking about alternatives to prison time. The meeting with Harold Steinberg was arranged for the following afternoon at the county jail. Marcus spent the night before wondering what he could possibly say to the man he had brutally attacked. How do you apologize for something so senseless and cruel? What words could possibly make up for the pain and trauma he had caused? When Harold Steinberg was wheeled into the visiting room, Marcus was shocked by his appearance. The veteran looked frilier than he had remembered, with visible bruises on his face and a bandage covering part of his forehead. His left arm was in a sling, and Marcus could see the careful way he moved, indicating that his ribs were still healing. Despite his injuries, Harold's eyes were alert and kind. He positioned his wheelchair across from Marcus and studied the young man for a long moment before speaking. You look different than I expected, Harold said finally. Marcus didn't know what to say to that, so he remained quiet. When people told me about the young man who attacked me, they described someone filled with hate, someone dangerous and irredeemable. Harold's voice was gentle, not accusatory. But you just look lost. Those words broke something open in Marcus. He had been preparing for anger, for accusations, for demands for justice. He wasn't prepared for kindness. Mr. Steinberg, I don't know why you're here, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know why you want to help me after what I did. I hurt you for no reason at all. Harold nodded slowly. You did hurt me. I've got broken ribs and a concussion that still gives me headaches. I'll be doing physical therapy for months. He paused, watching Marcus's face carefully. But I've been thinking a lot about why you did it, and I realized something. You didn't attack me because you hate veterans or because you're inherently evil. You attacked me because you're in pain. Marcus felt tears starting to form his eyes. That's not an excuse for what I did. No, it's not an excuse, Harold agreed. But it is an explanation. And explanations matter because they help us understand how to fix things. Harold reached into a folder he had brought with him and pulled out a newspaper clipping. It was an article about Marcus from 2 years ago when he had been named to the All-State football team. The photo showed a confident young man in a Letterman jacket, surrounded by teammates and coaches. I did some research on you, Harold said. Full scholarship to State University. Team captain, honor roll student. Volunteered at youth football camps. He looked up at Marcus. What happened to that young man? Marcus felt like he was looking at a stranger in the newspaper photo. I got injured. Lost my scholarship. Everything I had worked for was just gone. And you got angry, Harold said. It wasn't a question. I got furious. I felt like everyone else was getting breaks that I didn't get. I felt like the world owed me something because I had lost so much. Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I turned into someone I don't even recognize. Harold was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned forward in his wheelchair. Can I tell you about Vietnam, Marcus? Marcus nodded, not sure where this was going. I was 19 when I enlisted, about the same age you are now. I thought I was going to be a hero. I thought the war would be an adventure, and I'd come back covered in glory. Harold's voice took on a distant quality, as if he was looking back through decades of memory. Instead, I watched my best friends die in a jungle on the other side of the world. I got wounded twice, once badly enough that they wanted to send me home. But I stayed because I didn't want to abandon my unit. Harold rolled up his sleeve to show Marcus a long scar that ran from his wrist to his elbow. Shrapnel from a grenade that killed the 2 men standing next to me. I carried guilt about surviving when they didn't for 20 years. Marcus was beginning to understand why Harold was telling him this story. When I came home, nobody wanted to hear about what we had been through. People protested against us, called us baby killers, spat on us in airports. Harold's voice remained steady, but Marcus could see the pain in his eyes. I was angry too, Marcus. Angrier than you can imagine. I felt betrayed by my country, abandoned by my government, and forgotten by the people I had tried to serve. What did you do with that anger? Marcus asked. Harold smiled sadly. For about 5 years, I let it destroy me. I drank too much, got into fights, pushed away everyone who tried to help me. I blamed everyone else for my problems and refused to take responsibility for my own life. Marcus felt a chill of recognition. What changed? I met a man named Father Miguel at a soup kitchen where I was volunteering during one of my brief attempts to get my life together. He was an older priest who had worked with troubled youth for decades. Harold's expression softened at the memory. He told me something that changed everything. He said that everyone carries two wolves inside them, one representing love, compassion, and forgiveness, and the other representing anger, hatred, and revenge. The wolf that wins is the one you choose to feed. Marcus had never heard that story before, but it resonated with something deep inside him. I realized I had been feeding the wrong wolf for years, Harold continued, and it was eating me alive from the inside. So I made a choice to starve that wolf and start feeding the other one instead. How did you do that? I started small. I volunteered at the soup kitchen regularly. I helped other veterans who were struggling with the same issues I had faced. I learned to see my pain not as something that made me special or entitle me to hurt others, but as something that could help me understand and help people who were going through similar struggles. Harold reached across the table and placed his uninjured hand on Marcus's arm. Marcus, I see that same angry wolf in you that I carried for years. But I also see the potential for the other wolf. I see a young man who is capable of great things if he can learn to transform his pain into purpose. I don't understand why you're being so kind to me, Marcus said honestly. I could have killed you. I would deserve whatever punishment they want to give me. Maybe you would deserve punishment, Harold agreed. But punishment alone rarely changes people. It just makes them better at hiding their anger, not better at dealing with it. What changes people is being given a chance to make amends, to transform their worst moment into a catalyst for becoming their best self. Harold pulled out another piece of paper from his folder. I've spoken with the district attorney about something called restorative justice. Instead of just sending you to prison, you would serve your sentence through community service, specifically working with veterans and at-risk youth. You would also attend counseling and anger management classes. Marcus stared at the proposal in disbelief. You want me to work with veterans? After what I did to you, I want you to learn what I learned, Harold said firmly. That the people we think of as different from us, the people we blame for our problems, are usually just human beings carrying their own pain and trying to make sense of their lives, just like we are. Harold's voice grew stronger as he continued. I want you to meet veterans who came home from war with missing limbs and PTSD and homelessness, who still get up every morning and try to make the world a little better. I want you to work with teenagers who have faced poverty, abuse, and abandonment, who still believe they can build something meaningful from their lives. What if I'm not ready for that? What if I mess it up? Harold smiled, and for the first time, Marcus saw real hope in the veteran's eyes. Then, you'll learn from your mistakes and try again. That's what growth looks like, Marcus. It's not about being perfect. It's about being willing to keep trying to be better than you were yesterday. As their meeting came to an end, Harold handed Marcus a small card with his phone number written on it. If the judge approves this program, I want you to call me every week. I want to be your mentor through this process. Marcus looked at the card, then back at Harold's face. Why? Why are you willing to do this for someone who hurt you so badly? Harold was quiet for a moment. Then, he answered with words that would stay with Marcus for the rest of his life. Because 35 years ago, a priest named Father Miguel saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. He gave me a second chance when I didn't deserve one. Everything good that I've done since then, every life I've been able to help, every person I've been able to serve, it all started with someone believing I could be better than my worst moment. As Harold was wheeled out of the visiting room, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in 2 years. Hope. Not the false hope of wishing his problems would magically disappear, but the real hope that comes from understanding that change is possible, that redemption is within reach, and that sometimes the people we hurt the most can become the very ones who show us the way back to our true selves. Marcus had no way of knowing that his journey was just beginning, or that the lessons Harold Steinberg would teach him would not only transform his own life, but would eventually help him save dozens of other young people from making the same mistakes he had made. Sometimes the worst day of your life becomes the first day of your real life. For Marcus Thompson, that transformation was about to begin.